We need to talk to each other. What's the alternative? A civil war where we just constantly fight each other? I mean, we live in the same country. We have to start rowing in the same direction.
Alex, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. Big fan of what you do.
Appreciate it. And it's been exciting to watch you launch your new CNN show. The Story Is already doing some really exciting work with CNN, big interviews with the likes of Pete Buttigieg. How's it all treating you?
It's been a crazy time. I mean, our show's about a week old now, but we've already talked with Gavin Newsom and Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jerry Brown and Pete Buttigieg and Nancy Pelosi and Harmeet Dillon and Kevin Kiley. I mean, all these, a lot of folks on the right and left. I mean, part of what we're trying to do here is have a place to bring everybody together, especially emphasize some of our friends on the West Coast, where we have live news finally and prime time, which hasn't been happening for a long time in cable news. And it's been a wild week to be certainly in the West Coast, everything that's happened in the last week or so.
For sure. I mean, you had the big redistricting proposition in California and so much more, bringing coverage. Hosting from California, which is a little different because so much of cable news is, New York City focused and Eastern time focused. But
yeah,
that's
and the Dodgers
interesting.
winning the World Series, of course. Can't forget about that.
Of course. I totally pay super close attention to that. But what interests me about your work and why I was really excited to see you teaming up with CNN is I followed you for many years in your time on Fox 11 in California, hosting debates and discussions and dialogues and all people all over the perspectives politically, from Republican to Democrat, left wing to right wing. And I've already seen you hosting panels and some intense conversations about redistricting and more on your show. But talk a little bit about that and what you hope to do, because frankly, one of my disappointments with cable news is my favorite shows across multiple networks are the ones that have people with different perspectives interacting and debating, preferably in person. But that, while it does rate well, does seem to be increasingly rare. So is that something you hope to focus on even more?
Yeah, look, we need to talk to each other. What's the alternative? A civil war where we just constantly fight each other? I mean, we live in the same country. We have to start rowing in the same direction. And so I think it's important for cable news and for podcasts like this one and other places to sort of model the behavior that we can actually have a conversation with each other. That doesn't mean we always agree. That doesn't mean it's all softball stuff. But I think that we can show that yes, you can disagree without being disagreeable. Not everything has to be a personal attack. And just because somebody disagrees with you, they're not, they're your opponent. They're not your enemy. We've gotten to this point where we have so dehumanized each other because our media diet is so algorithmically focused on making us hate each other and putting all dissent out of our even thought process, that we can't have a conversation. I mean, I remember hearing a lot of people that say, I don't understand how Gavin Newsom can win. I don't know a single person who's in favor of him. Well, that means that your timeline is so skewed in one direction, you're not hearing the opposite. And also the truth. Donald Trump is the worst person ever. He's Adolf Hitler, some people claim, obviously not true. And so how could you even say anything remotely nice about him? And then you end up with situations like what we saw with Charlie Kirk, where that's the logical conclusion of what we're doing. So I think all of us have a responsibility to pull that back and not agree, fight it out politically, but do it in a way that can be productive, constructive, hopefully entertaining, and that hopefully rises the level of dialogue a little bit in this country.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And I was already, when you were talking about what else do we do besides talk, my mind immediately went to Charlie Kirk, to attacks on Democratic lawmakers that we saw as well several months ago, and just this horrific uptick we've seen in political violence that I think that way madness lies. And the only solution is to settle our differences with ballots, not bullets, and disagreements, not violence. And so anybody who's modeling that in media is somebody who I think is serving the community and the country on that front. And you raised such an interesting point about the echo chamber, because this happens on social media, but unfortunately, it's happened somewhat in media, though shows like yours are working to correct it, where people are really only exposed to the people that agree with them. And then what
Yeah.
happens is two things. One, people become more radical, right? Like if you have a room full of all Republicans just bouncing off of each other, they're not going to move to the left or to the middle. They're only
Mhm.
going to move further right. Same thing if you have a room full of progressives. They're only going to move further and further to the left. And then, two, they also lose touch with what the other side actually believes. So I've seen really interesting polling where you poll Republicans asking them what Democratic positions are, and then you map that next to what they actually are. And of course, they think the median Democrat is way more to the left than they actually are. Same vice versa. How do we fix that? How do we break through people's echo chambers? Because it's comfortable to stay in them, and it can be a little uncomfortable to tune into something that's going to shatter your echo chamber.
Well, I mean, but that's one of the things about bringing both sides literally to a table. It is so, like, for many years on Fox 11, I would do debates with Brian Tyler Cohen, this big progressive YouTube star on the left, and Tommy Lahren, a big conservative online star on the right. And so that was one of the only times when viewers of Tommy Lahren saw a leftist perspective, and vice versa, because Tommy Lahren's followers are tuning in to see her hopefully dunk on Brian Tyler Cohen in their view. Brian's followers are tuning in to see him do the same, but in doing so, they're being exposed to another perspective. So this idea of doing journalism that incorporates multiple perspectives is not only the right thing to do, the ethical thing to do, the professional thing to do, it's good business. Because automatically you are expanding your potential audience by two. Because now there's a home for conservatives and liberals to listen because they feel like they're being incorporated into the conversation. I think a big reason why people tune out is when they feel like their voice isn't represented. They can't see themselves. So not only is that representation in terms of, race and age and all the rest of that stuff, but it's also representation in terms of diversity of thought. And I think that that's important and also a smart strategy. And so I think a lot of these companies would actually be better served in terms of what they really care about, which is making money, in expanding their base. As Michael Jordan said years ago, Republicans wear shoes too.
That's a good one. I hadn't heard that in a while, but it's interesting you raise that point, because I guess the flip side of this is, where do you draw the line in terms of who is worth talking to? How do you make sure that you are keeping people somewhat in check in terms of them not spouting off just absolute nonsense? Because there is some forms of debate that you'll see that go viral, but essentially devolve into like political Jerry Springer. And obviously that's not serving the public either.
Right. The former mayor of Cincinnati, Jerry Springer himself. So I think that here's my take when I have somebody on my show. I believe you should be able to share your opinion based on fact, and it's really not my place to get in the way of that. When you start saying things that are factually inaccurate, it is my job as the referee to step in and call that out and try to correct the record. It is my job as the referee to try to also help people that maybe don't follow this stuff every single day, when people start speaking in acronyms or start speaking in inside baseball talk, to kind of explain to them what's going on there. And also I think that blatant hate speech that targets somebody is not something worth platforming. But that being said, if you simply have a different opinion and you're coming in good faith and arguing it based off of real facts, I don't think it's my place to step in to fight you and to get in the way of that. It's my way. I mean, to challenge you, yes, and to provide the opposite perspective, but not do so in such an antagonistic or condescending way that I think a lot of cable news descends into. I think you see a lot of these.
You did say the term hate speech, which is a little bit of a trigger word for me, in the sense that as somebody who I started out my career in right-leaning media, I have unfortunately seen most non-liberal perspectives on all sorts of issues labeled hate speech at some point or another. I guess what I would say is I think there is no place for like hateful language or slurs. I mean, we literally have members of Congress just gratuitously saying slurs now. To me, that's totally anathema to just constructive dialogue. But some opinions that people think are hateful are a fair game. I mean, if a Republican's view is that men cannot become women, right? They just totally flat out disagree. I mean, some would call that hate speech. Say, don't platform that, don't debate that. But like at least more than half the country probably holds a perspective closer to that
Right.
than the opposite view. So how do you draw a line between gatekeeping acceptable discourse? We don't want people shouting slurs at each other, but not allowing a fundamentally subjective idea like what's hateful and what's not to become subject to personal interpretation.
Yeah, and I think we saw a lot of that during COVID, honestly, where so many just different opinions uh, from good faith were completely silenced and censored. And now we look back on it, and a lot of those people were right. So yeah, I think that's an important thing. By hate speech, I mean like Kanye West coming out and ranting about how horrible Jewish people are. Like, I don't find that to be constructive. I don't think that we as a media are helping the dialogue by platforming that and elevating that. That's sort of what I mean by that. In terms of a disagreement on the issues, I think that's fine, and I think we need to if we're going to skew towards something, we should skew towards more free speech, not less free speech. What I find personally um, annoying about some cable news coverage is when it's like, well, we know better than you, so this person is talking, but we're not going to show them talking because it could be damaging to hear from them. So we're going to watch it, and if it's worth it, we'll tell you. But I think people are smart enough for the most part to make up their own minds, give them the information, and let them do with it what they can. And then it's part of our role to provide context, to try to do fact checking, all the rest of that. But this idea, especially as media itself is being democratized so much with podcasting and social media and all the rest of it, that there's one person that knows the truth, and we are going to tell you the truth, and we're the arbiter of that. I think is condescending, patronizing, and really actually a bad business strategy too.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And it is interesting. You talk about this like gatekeeper role. And I think perhaps we're living through an overcorrection, right? Part of why some people lost faith in traditional media was because they gatekept too much. They're like, well, we're not going to show you Trump's speech because it's not accurate, right? So we're just going to tell you what to think about it. When in reality, you'd probably be better served by letting people hear what the presidential candidate is saying and then providing your own context and perspective and letting people decide for themselves. But now I feel like we kind of have the Wild West. I host an independent podcast and YouTube channel that is opinionated, but is fact-based and does cite real sources. But the most popular ones really
Mm-hmm.
don't. I mean, they just say the most outlandish things. They peddle the most outlandish conspiracies. And that, I guess we're seeing the opposite side of this. At first, I was really excited by the rise of independent media and the democratization of independent media, especially as somebody who had a fair number of criticisms of traditional media. But now it's like, whoa, maybe we've gone way too far in the opposite direction, but people seem to be eating it up.
Yeah, and it's a real danger. I thought about this a lot. Here in LA, we had these the wildfires at the beginning of the year, and so I was on the air for 12 hours at a time doing continuous coverage of this real emergency. When people's lives were on the line, some people lost their lives, thousands of people lost their homes. I mean, it was a real crisis. And in that moment, when people are scared, people need reliable information to live and also to emotionally process what's happening. And that was a moment where it was like, I'm grateful for my journalism training. I'm grateful to have colleagues on the ground doing real work. I'm grateful to have sources in the government. I'm grateful to be able to provide this public service. In that moment, it was a public service. We were doing it commercial free. Because that information is needed. And I was thinking, okay, if a few years down the line, the trends continue and we start losing local news or we don't have that source there, then what happens? If you're in a real crisis and you don't have the quote unquote mainstream media or people with real training, real sources, real experience, and you need somebody to give you clear information, where do you go? And what does that mean for us? If God forbid we have another 9/11 and we're at war as a country, what happens in that situation? So this idea that we just abandon cable news, abandon mainstream media, abandon all gatekeeping, abandon all quote unquote establishment or legacy or whatever word we do. I think is a scary reality, and even so much of independent journalism is so often quoting legacy journalism to then start a conversation. So I think it's important that we all collectively as a people support good fact-based work so that we keep a lot of this stuff in business so that it's there when we really need it.
Yeah, so I do commentary and analysis, so I'm often citing mainstream reporting, maybe it's CNN, maybe it's New York Times, maybe it's Wall Street Journal, maybe it's Fox News, and then building and adding my perspective. But one thing, I don't know, do you use TikTok at all?
Sure, a little bit. I use more Instagram Reels, but
Well,
yeah.
there's these breaking news content creators who make these videos straight to camera saying, breaking news, stuff this just happened at the White House, blah, blah, blah. And they just rip off the Associated Press with no credit. And yet their videos are getting like 10 million views. And so they're making probably, I don't know, 3 or 4 grand from that single video. But they are literally just loosely adapting a script from the Associated Press or from another breaking news outlet. And as much as I am very sympathetic to a lot of the critiques of mainstream media over the years for a lack of debate, of diversity of perspectives, for maybe falling into its own echo chambers, not accurately representing the whole diverse country and gun owners and religious people and more perspectives, I mean, at some point, there's not going to be the underlying mainstream media that new media, or as much of it, as the new media relies on. And people don't seem to understand that. And I think that's an interesting dynamic at play.
And there's the whole creator economy of stealing our videos and then making their living off of that, right? Ripping the videos online, putting often an inaccurate caption on it to try to juice engagement, and then not giving credit, not explaining the source, and then just making their money off of ads on X or whatever it is. And that's frustrating sometimes from the person that did the reporting, that did the interview, and they're making all the money off of it, oftentimes with the wrong spin. And I don't know how we put that genie back in the bottle.
I was going to say, how do you solve that?
I don't know. I don't know if that's something that Elon Musk even thinks of as a problem. I don't think he does. But I mean, that is a very frustrating reality that I see almost every day.
Yeah. But it is interesting. You talked about California, and you've probably, at least on my radar, covered it in more closely, California politics and its effect on the national level, than anybody else I'm familiar with in the business. And in particular, one figure I want to get your thoughts on is Gavin Newsom. You've covered him for years and years at this point. You've interviewed him so many times. And I'll just tell you my perspective, and then I'm curious for yours. I have no idea who the real Gavin Newsom is, because I have watched him at the state level enact, whether you agree with them or not, very left-wing policies on issues like gender identity or different policies in schools or trans athletes or other things. And then I'll watch him get on a podcast with a more conservative-leaning host, and suddenly he is like agreeing with them on different issues and saying, yeah, when did I ever say Latinx? Of course, he said it like a bunch of times on camera and in speeches and in tweets and other stuff. And on one hand, Trump has shown us that that is a huge political asset when you can rebrand and readapt your position.
Shamelessness works in politics.
It does, unfortunately. But I guess the question is, if he is to run for president or just to elevate to a further position of prominence, who is he actually at heart?
Well, it's interesting. My colleague Ron Brownstein has written about this really effectively. He's pointed out that Gavin Newsom is essentially trying to do two things at once. He's trying to show that he's the best online fighter of Trump and Trumpism, and he's trying to show that he's much more of a centrist than you think he is. So he's trying to get the online left fired up with the memes and, the attacks and everything's against him, all of that. And then at the same time, if you actually look at what he's doing policy wise, he's strongly going towards the middle on things like trans sports, on, some of the stuff he's doing around homelessness and criminal justice reform and race-based stuff, all of it. If you look at what he's actually doing, he's heading towards the middle. What is Gavin Newsom at his core? He's really good at reading polls. So unlike a lot of his Democratic colleagues, when he sees like the trans issue at 80-20, he says, let's go with the 80. That's better politically than going with the 20. And so that's, I think, where he is right now. Does he have core convictions and some of that based in progressivism? Sure. But does he usually tend to do the thing that is good for the constituency that he has? Sure. I mean, he was way ahead of everybody on marrying same-sex couples, decades ago. But he also was the mayor of San Francisco, where there's more same-sex couples than just about anywhere else. It's smart politics, in addition to something that I do think he genuinely believes in. But so to your point, yeah, I mean, there aren't necessarily the clearest, these are my absolute 100% principles in a way you see with other politicians, but maybe that's actually really beneficial for him as he moves forward. The question is, if he indeed runs for president, as it clearly certainly seems like he is already, will he be able to do what he has done in recent elections in California and make it a referendum on Trump, Trumpism, and the Republican Party failures in his view? Or will it be a referendum on his record? Will it be about the streets of San Francisco with homeless people on them and potential crime and people moving out because of regulations and all the rest of it? In his recent elections here, he is able to make it about Trump, not about him. And if he can do that nationally, he may win. If it becomes about all the progressive craziness of California and the land of fruits and nuts and all the rest of the stuff that people say about our state, it may be tough for him, as it was tough for Kamala Harris, who was the first Democratic nominee ever from California.
Well, and I think that it's interesting. I was already going to bring her up in my next question, because Kamala Harris is somebody who, in fairness to her, she only had a few months because of what happened with Joe Biden, but she tried to pivot to the middle on some of her issues. But then essentially her long record as very significantly progressive came back to haunt her. When you look at like what one of the most effective ads against her was talking about her past support in an ACLU survey for taxpayer-funded transgender surgeries for immigrants, illegal immigrants, I believe, and prisoners. And so I'm not sure that when you have somebody with Gavin Newsom's extensive record, because as a governor, you actually have to do things, unlike a senator where you just mostly bloviate or go on television and occasionally pass legislation.
And as a mayor,
that
too?
record of the pandemic, of the French Laundry, right? Getting caught breaking your own rules, of some of the things that have happened around gender issues and his policies that allowed people born biologically male to be put in women's prisons. It's like, I think that stuff will come back to haunt him. And maybe Trump will suck all the oxygen out of the room. But I don't know. Maybe in California it worked, but nationally, do you really think he could just get away with a rebrand?
We'll see. I mean, look, he went to South Carolina a few months ago, and I wasn't there, but I talked to a lot of the reporters who were on the ground, and I said, were the people asking about California homelessness or some of these issues? And they said nobody asked about that. They were just focused on how much Trump sucks, and they were thrilled that somebody was fighting and that somebody showed up to make that point. So we'll see. I mean, sometimes he has not always reacted great when reporters press him on some of these things. And so, the national press is a little more aggressive than my friends in the California press, in part because, we have a one-party state and we deal with a lot of the same people all the time. And I think the national press would not have as much of an issue of burning a bridge that maybe some folks here would, and just sort of launching in an attack. And so could there be a moment, not like what happened with Katie Porter, maybe to that extent, but where we have seen outbursts from him sometimes when he's challenged on some things that he doesn't like to talk about in the past? Could that happen? Who knows? I think we're a long ways away from that. We're still not clear who the field is, but his fundamental operating philosophy, which I think he also was thinking in 2022 when I covered him, when he thought that Joe Biden was not going to run, I think, and he started this play back then, if you look back at it, and I traveled with him to the White House at the time, is he believes that the Democratic Party is weak, that the Democratic base is angry, that Democratic politicians have been rolled over, that the online space craves confrontation, and that nobody is giving them what they want. And so he is giving them what they want. And to his credit, politically, at least right now, it is working for him. His poll numbers are up dramatically in a potential race. His social media followers are way up. He used Prop 50 as a way to expand his donor base and create a national list that rivals any other candidate. And he is being talked about more in the conversation nationally, both on cable news and online, than anybody else. And he's kind of made himself the Democratic frontrunner in a period of a few months. So right now, it appears that strategy is working. Will that get tired as you keep going? Will there need to be another moment? Who knows?
Mm-hmm. What's something people, like, from your time with him, right? You've traveled with him, you've interviewed him, a moment that stands out or something about him that might surprise people?
Well, I think a lot of people may not know that he's dyslexic. And so he can't read speeches. He doesn't use a teleprompter. He doesn't even walk up with notes. Everything that he does is off the top of his head. And that dyslexia, I think, also really informed how he grew up. As a kid, he really struggled in school. He didn't even know he was dyslexic, but he couldn't read, and he was bullied and he was made fun of for that. He talks about the fact that, sports kind of gave him a place to go where he didn't have to be in the classroom, and he was, big guy and athletic and all the rest of that, and he kind of found his own there. But a lot of his sort of childhood trauma was being bullied for being a kid who people thought was stupid. And so he still, I think, has this chip on his shoulder of the guy that was underestimated, the guy that people was mocking, and the guy who's got something to prove to people. And I think that is kind of at his core who Gavin Newsom actually is. And I think that people see him as sort of the handsome, wealthy, well-spoken guy with the hot wife and the whole thing, and they think of him as one way. But in reality, a lot of who Gavin Newsom actually is, and he said this to me, is that third grader who was mocked by his classmates.
That's really interesting. I didn't know that he had dyslexia, and I've followed him for many years. I think he's a formidable candidate. I've been obviously very critical of him coming from my perspective over the years, but he does have the charisma. He has the good looks, and good looks are important in politics. I think, I don't know, my early soft bet would be Newsom Ocasio-Cortez in
Oh,
2020.
God. I don't know if he would do that. I mean, look, here's the other thing that I think Gavin Newsom does that makes him effective in this environment, kind of coming full circle with what we were talking about. Gavin Newsom watches Fox News Channel every night. He looks
Really?
at social media metrics every day. He can tell me more about how my tweets are performing than I can. He is so aware of where the conversation is, and is so aware, especially of where the right is, in a way that very few people on the left are. Gavin Newsom's father-in-law, Jennifer Siebel Newsom's parents, are prominent Republican donors who are like buddies with Ron DeSantis and people like that. He is a rich guy who has hung out with a lot of rich people who also are Republicans. So this idea that Gavin Newsom is living in some sort of information silo in San Francisco and not understanding where the other side is not true. I mean, it's part of the reason that he has more effectively than anybody else copied Donald Trump's secret to success to win over the Democrats. I mean, and a lot of times he's realized that simply just, condescending and talking about Trump doesn't work, but copying him seems to be working. So that's the other thing I don't think people understand about him. He's very aware of what's being said on the right, and that's not true of most Democratic Congress members who do not engage with the other side.
Yeah, I think it's notable that Newsom did that debate with Ron DeSantis a few years back. I don't know any other Democratic governor that would have agreed to something like that. I think it's notable he has a personal relationship with Sean Hannity, I believe. And he does, I think, have that awareness in a way that makes him more formidable politically. But I'm sure
Charlie
he'll
Kirk
be
to the first guest on his podcast. I mean,
yes.
he's aware of that. And then obviously, and now he's like trying to figure out the politics of that. So there was a moment when I asked him on my show, our first show, about the fact that he said to Charlie Kirk that his son was so excited and wanted to stay at home and wanted to meet him. And I said, your son was obviously a fan of Charlie Kirk. And then he sort of didn't want to admit that, which was really kind of strange.
So I thought he kind of flip-flopped on that.
Yeah. So he's also aware of the politics of this is dicey. The idea of trying to be a good general election candidate that could potentially appeal to people where you think maybe he isn't that, but then also be somebody that's appealing to the Democratic base. And as we know, the Democratic base has a lot more purity tests than the Republican base do. I mean, the Republican base, for the most part, is like, are you with Trump? Great. Come on in. And the Democratic base, by a large part, are, do you check every single box on every issue that we believe in? Okay. And if you're not on one of them, maybe not. I mean, that's obviously a little bit of an oversimplification, but there is a bit of a difference in the two parties on that front.
For sure. And I think some of the things we're talking about that would make Gavin Newsom a formidable general election candidate as the Democratic nominee would make it difficult for him to get through a Democratic presidential primary, because the primary system gives a lot of weight to the most involved participants on either side who tend to be more extreme. So hardcore progressives. That's why we saw the Democratic 2020 presidential primary, them putting their hands up for things that we now look back at as like, whoa, those were really out there lefty positions. But that's the nature of a primary, right? Is that the most diehard people get to decide who the nominee is, but their tastes don't neatly map on to the tastes of a general electorate always.
But he's aware that the one thing that unifies Democrats, the only thing that unifies Democrats, is they hate President Trump. So he's trying to be perceived as the person who is most exemplifying that hatred of President Trump. And he thinks that that's a smart policy position. But to your point about the primary, the danger for Gavin Newsom, who, like many politicians, but I think even more so than many politicians, likes to be liked by the room that he's in, and can shapeshift a little bit depending on where he's at. Not the only politician to do that. We know everybody's done that over the years, but he seems to really do that. The danger is you say something in front of one of these Democratic interest groups that gets the room on your side, but then comes back to bite you down the line. And it takes a lot of discipline to not do that. And that's potentially problematic for him and frankly, for everybody.
Well, Alex, I will be waiting with eager ears for more of your coverage as Newsom and other figures that you've been covering closely take up a bigger and bigger spotlight, and with great interest for the debates and conversations you'll be hosting now on CNN. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and keep up the good work.
We got to get you there for some of these debates. We want to feature you.
I'm telling you, I'll come out, but maybe I'll have to line up a couple other things to make a trip out of it.
Please do. Thank you very much, and great to talk with you and your audience.
Thanks.